Hi everyone. So today I'm going to focus on Curley's wife and what you could talk about and explore if she was to come up in your exam. So how is she presented as a character? What is important for Curley's wife is to not think about her in a one-dimensional sense, just how she's presented very much at the beginning as being quite promiscuous. She's referred to as a piece of jailbait. The men imply she'd clear out for 20 bucks and that she's a bit of a flirt and she wants to be around the men. We can't only think of her in that sense, and we need to explore the more vulnerable side of her character. So, yes, you could talk about her being promiscuous, flirtatious. Also, you could look at the moment when she's very racist and cruel, but then also think about her loneliness, which transpires more so, I guess, towards the end of the novel is when she admits to her loneliness, but we have hints of that all of the way through. She's desperately trying to speak to other men, to be around people. I say to other men, but I mean, she's the only woman on the ranch. Who else has she got to talk to? And in a sense, how disposable she is. So key scenes that you could focus on for Curley's wife would definitely be the first time that she is introduced. When she stands there in the doorway and she thrusts her body forward, she has her red nail varnish on, her red lips is heavily made up. That is a crucial part to consider when thinking about Curley's wife. But again, within that, really questioning, is she that promiscuous? Is she that flirtatious? Because other than her thrusting her body forward, there's nothing really else to suggest that she is being promiscuous. So we really have to question that. The scene where she is racist towards Crooks might be one you would want to consider, and then her death at the end and her demise under Lenny's grip. Some of the key themes that would link to Curley's wife are loneliness, hope, and power. Within power, you could think of her lack of power as a woman, or you could think of the authority that she does have in that moment with Crooks. So some of the key scenes then, I do tend to find that students remember quotes more so for Curley's wife than any other character, but it's important that you have a variety. Students tend to remember the ones from her initial introduction. As I said, if you only focus on that, then your knowledge, your exploration of Curley's wife is going to be quite limited. So make sure you have a good variety. So some of the key quotations, I won't read them out now because I will focus on those more as we go on the following slides. But I do have a variety there, as you can see, from different points throughout the novel and different points that you could make using those quotations. In terms of linking to the context, I will speak about that through the video, but just quickly, you would consider the role of her as a woman, and think about how she is confined to the private sphere. So that means her being in the household. And Curley seems to very much want her to remain there and within that domestic role. So she is the only woman on the ranch. She desperately craves companionship. Her and Curley never appear together, only when she's dead. They seem to have a very distant, potentially loveless relationship from what we can gather and infer. But what's important, and I'll say this in the next slide, is don't only talk about women in the 1930s as housewives. And every woman was a housewife and confined to the household and cooking and cleaning. There was way more to the role of women at that time than that. Okay, so yes, we're going to think about how they were affected by the Great Depression, and in ways how, yes, women were confined, maybe controlled by their husbands, but that wasn't the only thing that women did. Okay, so you would sound pretty ignorant to just say that. You don't want to sound like you have limited knowledge and of contextual knowledge. You want to show off the extent of what you do know. And then also you could consider Steinbeck's letter to the actress that was going to play Curley's wife. So from what he says then, it's not even just us inferring what he wanted to achieve through his portrayal of Curley's wife by having a woman on the ranch. But by looking at that letter, it's a primary source of what Steinbeck has written himself and the ways in which he wants Curley's wife to be perceived. So that's a very powerful tool to have and use. Okay, so just a couple of images on here to really make you think about the role of women around the 1930s. And yes, while we have this domestic role that was heavily advertised, that women would, even when they were cleaning, they were heavily made up, look stereotypically, I guess, beautiful with their hair done, their makeup on, the pretty dresses. So we do need to think about that. We need to think about how women in ways were confined to that role. But also things to consider is women during and post the World War and how that changed the role of women. The fact that they had jobs that they never previously had, how they took men's jobs when men were off and fighting war. So yes, there wasn't equality. Yes, women were paid less than men in cases where men returned from war, they would take those jobs back. Women still had that sense of empowerment that they had these jobs that they'd never had previously. We've got images here of female pilots. Here we've got propaganda used of women where they were influential in the war, having more power perhaps than ever. And then the suffragette movement and how women fought for equality, fought for our right to vote. So we can't just say that women were just oppressed, because a lot of things was happening throughout history, whether that's historically or socially, to impact the role of women. And then also think of the flapper girls in the 1920s and the rise of that, the roaring 20s, where women had more freedom, they had more sexual liberation, they were drinking, they were smoking, which normally might have been more something that a man would do. So women had that sense of freedom. They were going out dancing and enjoying themselves. But then think about how that is maybe what Curley's wife yearns for. Okay, she knows that this is happening around her, but she's stuck on this ranch with a husband she potentially doesn't love. So in your responses, thinking of context, we can't just think of all women were housewives in the 1930s. Okay, you need to think of actually the scope of what you know and what Steinbeck is influenced by and perhaps commenting on through Curley's wife. So yeah, we've got the 1920s flapper girls versus this poster we've got here of a 1930s housewife. So think about that, okay? That on one sense, we've got this woman with more freedom, and then this woman heavily having a domestic role and maybe doing things to please a man, like having the house clean, having his tea cooked from when he gets home, and how that might influence Curley's wife. And it isn't just about Curley's wife, she's not a real person, but how that might have impacted women at that time. Okay, so on here, this is a section of Steinbeck's letter. So these are his own words and what he'd said to an actress that was not sure how she should play the role of Curley's wife. And I mean, that tells us something. It tells us that her character is ambiguous. That even this character who is playing her doesn't know quite which way to approach it. Like, is she solely harsh, brash, bold, confident, in your face, flirtatious, promiscuous, or actually is that a bit of a front? Actually, should that actress be a bit more subtle and show hints of being vulnerable? So even the actress wasn't sure. So this is where Steinbeck has written a letter to her to give his view on the character that he created and how he would want her to be, I guess, perceived. So he writes, "She is not highly sexed particularly, but knows instinctively that if she is to be noticed at all, it will be because someone finds her sexually desirable. Okay, so with Curley's wife, we might say that yes, at the beginning, she thrusts her body forward. She stands there in the doorway. She wants to be noticed. You could maybe say that she's an attention seeker. She's heavily made up. But is this not her adhering to what women were meant to do at the time? Where the advertisements that we see, which women felt that they need to adhere to, the expectations of a woman. Women were sexualized. So is she not just doing what she feels she has to be noticed? If she's desperate for companionship on a ranch full of men, she might think that the only thing she can use is her body in order to do that. And if the man finds her attractive, that will maybe help her to befriend them, to be able to actually spark a conversation rather than just pushing her away. So that's what Steinbeck here is telling us. So she knows utterly nothing about sex except the mass misinformation that girls tell one another. If anyone, a man or woman, ever gave her a break or treated her like a person, she would be a slave to that person. So her craving for contact is immense, but she, with her background, is incapable of conceiving any contact without some sexual context. So that's telling us that the only way she thinks that she will get attention, the only way she knows how to hold a conversation, is to perhaps use her looks, her body, and to be flirtatious, and that there's some sexual content there. If that's what the misinformation women tell one another, that the media tells women, then that is simply that's what she is doing to try and get attention, to try and get some companionship. So really, as readers, can we be harsh on her and to say that she's a flirt, that she's married and she's going around with other men? Or is she really just seeking companionship, but she doesn't know how to go about that? And Steinbeck reveals that how he's created this character is that she's built up all these defenses. She's trying to protect herself. And if those barriers, these walls that she's built up were to be broken down, we would actually see her as a nice, honest person. So the time, I guess, where we will criticize Curley's wife the most, more than being flirtatious and promiscuous, is when she's racist. But the defenses that she's broke up to protect herself, and then it's like she wants crooks to feel like a victim as well, just like she does. And it isn't excusing her behaviour at all. But is there a way we can try and understand the way she acts? The only time actually they do see almost her innocence and her being sweet is when she's laid dead, and then she's described so differently. Okay, so some of the quotations then. Initially, she is described in there's lots of red. So, which is one being her red fingernails. So the colour red is a bold colour. And if we think of the connotations of that, that could signal danger. Okay, if you think of stop signs, warning signs, they tend to be red. So his use of that colour could foreshadow the danger that she poses to the men for George and Lenny, as they might lose their jobs countless times. And they have already lost their jobs because of Lenny. Remember as well, that girl also wore red. So that's a motif that's used throughout. So again, this is another signal by Steinbeck to foreshadow that maybe she's going to cause this trouble for Lenny once again. But when she is actually dead, her cheeks are still rosy and her lips are still rouged. Okay, she's still got this redness about her. But it's no longer about being dangerous and causing trouble. It's actually they notice how sweet she is. At this point, she doesn't pose a danger to the men anymore, but it's took her actual death for them to be able to realise that and to finally be able to see her innocence. Okay, a quote I really like for Curley's wife is the fact she has ostrich feathers in her hair. So there is contrast used. Okay, while the feathers, that might be a symbol linked to the flapper girls. Flapper girls would quite often wear a big feather in their hair. It's iconic of flapper girls. So if we think that flapper girls symbolize this this liberation and freedom, can we then link that to Curley's wife, that this is what she strives for? Remember, she wants to be a Hollywood actress. So that feather could signify her longing to be like a flapper girl, to have freedom. However, an ostrich, the fact that it's an ostrich feather, remember that is a flightless bird. So could that actually signify how, despite her dreams, her American dreams, that she is trapped? She doesn't have wings. She can't flee the ranch. And she is trapped there. She is constrained as a woman and by her husband. So don't just think of it at the beginning that it's easy to remember that she's described as a tart, a piece of jailbait, but actually think in more depth, be more critical about these quotations, to actually think what else could Steinbeck be suggesting about her. So when she comes into the room, quite often actually, throughout when she comes into rooms, she stands in the doorway. It's as if there's this barrier there and she can't quite enter into the room with the other men because there's the boundary there which she can't cross. So she's described as they glanced up and the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. So when she comes into the room, she blocks off that light and she stands in the doorway. So metaphorically, this could imply that she is bringing darkness into their life. It could forebode and foreshadow that she is going to be the cause of trouble. Curley's wife could block their dream. Okay, if the light would be coming through, other than Curley's wife standing there, she is blocking that light. So in that sense, is bringing darkness into that room. As I said, she often stands in a doorway. There is a physical barrier between her and the men on the ranch because it's off bounds. The men don't want her there. Her husband doesn't want her there. So this signifies her detachment from the men, but from the rest of society, how ostracized she is. Yet, when she enters the barn with Lenny, she doesn't stand in the doorway. She just appears, and then he notices her right there. So she is being transgressive. Transgressive meaning that you do something you're not supposed to, you're crossing a line, you're crossing the barrier. And thereby is she punished for that because she doesn't conform, she doesn't remain in that public sphere, and she tries to break away from that. She's crossed the boundary, she's crossed the doorway. Okay, towards the end of the novel then, she reveals her loneliness to Lenny. And well, she actually does before to Candy and Crooks, but I feel like the moment with Lenny is much more intimate. So she questions, think I don't like to talk to somebody every once in a while, and I never get to talk to nobody. I get awful lonely. Okay, so this epitomizes her loneliness on the ranch. So she is a very brazen character. Okay, she's quite bold and in your face. But beneath that and a harsh exterior, is she just simply lonely? She's no different to the other characters who seek friendship and wants human connection. So the rhetorical questions here could signify her frustration, as if the men can complain about being lonely and like the life of migrant workers, how lonely that could be, how hostile it is. But they actually start to form some friendships on the ranch. She very much feels like an outsider. She doesn't have any friends. But they might think because she's a bit more maybe privileged, being married to the boss's son, being actually married, that she can't be lonely because she has that family and that security. But it's as if she's thinking about how ignorant and they've been here to assume that. So she uses the adjective awful to depict her own loneliness. And this is probably the height throughout the novella of when we will feel sympathy for her. I know that that does very much dip our sympathy when she's racist to Crooks, but in this scene, you're potentially going to regain some of that sympathy for her, because she is in a very loveless relationship without a friend in the world. That adverb never signals how the migrant workers, as they come and go, they never speak to her, and they're very resistant towards her because they're worried that she will stir trouble. So that's going to cause that endless cycle that every man who joins the ranch distances her, doesn't want to speak to her, thinks that she's going to be trouble. So continuously, anyone who joins that ranch is going to push her away. So it's this endless cycle of loneliness. So she tells Lenny, and I haven't added the quote here, but what I do like is when she's speaking to him, she rushes her words. She tries to get them out as quickly as possible because she knows that this is a valuable moment, that she's actually getting to talk to somebody. So she wants to say as much as she can while someone's actually listening. And when you think Lenny isn't really listening anyway, and she's opening up and, I don't know, revealing her vulnerability and having quite an open and honest conversation, and he just keeps talking about the rabbits. But even that, she doesn't mind. It's literally just someone that she can talk to. So she says to Lenny, I tell you, I ain't used to living like this. I could have made something of myself, she said darkly. Maybe I will yet. So this is when she hints at her own American dream, how she wanted to be in the movies, wanted to be an actress, and that adverb darkly and I will yet, strong foreshadowing being used. So as I said, in chapter 2, she's described as having the ostrich feathers, likened to the flapper girls. So by her saying she isn't used to living like this, perhaps before she had more freedom. And she isn't used to her life now, where she is very much trapped by her husband, without any friends, being controlled. By shifting from the past tense, coulda, to the future tense, I will, it tells us that she hasn't lost hope for the future. She still has these dreams, which, as readers, we might feel are pipe dreams. We might question how realistic it was for her to think that she would have been an actress when she says that men give her these offers but never receives the letter, and blames her mother for throwing that away. She is very naive as a character, but it's important that these dreams at that moment are still alive. Both the adverb darkly, it foreshadows her tragic end and her inability to pursue those dreams. So we could question, what is Steinbeck trying to do with that? To talk about these women who have dreams and ambitions and they're crushed, and the fact that it's crushed maybe by Lenny, who's a man. What is he trying to say about the American dream and those ambitions of women? Is he trying to challenge that, and how, unfortunately, in society, that those dreams tend to be crushed? Okay, and then lastly, when she's killed, and just before she's killed, it says her body flopped like a fish, and she was still. Lenny had broken her neck. Okay, so you should hopefully remember that previously during the fight scene that it was Curley that was flopping like a fish, and then that foreshadows his wife's fate. Both of them equally defenseless under Lenny's grasp. So on a metaphorical level, it could reflect how Lenny, he hasn't only broken her neck through his violence, but we could also think about how he's also broken her dreams. If we think of the order of events, it's not just by chance that just before she's killed, she talks about her dreams and how I could still achieve that yet, and then she's killed. Okay, so metaphorically, her neck is broken, but also her dreams have been broken and crushed as well. So in the whole part actually where Curley's wife is killed, there are so many simple sentences used. And yes, we can say simple sentences makes it dramatic. You don't want a generic comment. Really think about, to look at sentence types, you need to be able to make a strong point with it in relation to the character or the theme. But I do think here that the simple sentence and how much the full paragraph is very devoid of emotion, meaning that there isn't much emotion in it. It reflects the simplicity of her life. So there is no one, even her husband, they don't display any sadness towards her and the fact that she's died at the end. So yeah, it's I don't know, towards the end, it's subjective whether you will feel sympathy for Curley's wife or not. but I do. The fact that nobody even cared about her at the end, and not even her own husband, almost used it as an opportunity to just get revenge. Okay, and then the last one. So this more engaging with a literary critic. So you wouldn't have to include this, but it helps you to become critical. And critical, I would say, is one of the main things that you have to do for that top band. So a literary critic called Charlotte Hadella implies that even if Curley's wife was to achieve her dream, okay, so if we go back to the point about her dreams, that her dreams are very superficial. Okay, so she suggests in her article that Curley's wife is always putting on a show. She's always having to be the actress. She's having to conform to what she thinks she's supposed to be and do as a woman, and what she can do to try and I don't know, seek companionship, to prove her worth as a woman. But she very much does what she maybe hears in the media, the misinformation that she's told, and how she tries to adhere to that. And even like her trying to break away from almost the status quo of women being at home and housewives and looking good for their husbands, having everything ready for their husbands. And she might see her big dream, her freedom is making it in Hollywood and being an actress. But what Hadella says is her dream is to become a cinematic image that occupies no space in the real world. Okay, so that's quite difficult to understand. But what she's saying is, even to be an actress, is that freedom? Is she breaking away from the stereotypes of a woman? Or is she not just doing the exact same thing on a screen? She's still just an image. It's not her real self. And that's what the critic here is suggesting. That even to get this dream, what is she really achieving? Isn't she still, again, going to be superficial? But okay, there is so much to say with Curley's wife. I think she's one of the most interesting characters to focus on. But remember to really explore the ambiguities of her character. Don't look at her in a one-dimensional sense. Don't just say that all women in 1930s were housewives. There's so much more to it than that. Right, okay, good luck. I hope that helps.